selection of our views, we can go into each of our views and apply materials and or refine these. Now you can create your own materials from scratch, and you can make your own maps like I explained in the presentation, but V-Ray has this Cosmos browser, which is a great source of materials, and if you can't find your material in here, you can probably find it from other sources, but I will use this for the sake of this tutorial. I will focus on importing a couple of different materials and texturing up the model. And for this purpose, I just built a very basic sort of studio in the scene, and we've also sort of changed Nathan's model here to give us a couple more examples. So say for instance we'll apply a concrete material to the floor, and I'll find one in here. I think I've used probably this one here. So on import, you notice this little option here that you have, and you can enable triplanar mapping. Basically, triplanar mapping will create its own mapping on all objects that you create under this material, and it will mean that the overall scale of this map and the orientation is fixed. So this really only works for material like this, or the grass, or perhaps a mesh that always runs in a certain way, or cloth that is a sort of infinite material and the orientation does not matter. So I've imported this material. I'll just click import and it will appear, and if I do this I'll probably create a second version of it here. And so if I look at this material, yeah, so just to say, only take triplanar for these types of materials. It wouldn't work necessarily with something like this, you know, that has a direction, and I'll explain more in a minute. So here's my material, and I showed you 3D Studio Max briefly. So here we have the deck of cards where everything kind of sits on top of each other. So the first one here is this triplanar map, and it tells the material to be a certain size, which is 200. My units are set to centimeters here, and if your units are set to millimeters, then this should say 2000, and you can always see in the map name which size this should be at. So to show this briefly in action, I can apply this one here to the selection to my floor, and you can see it over here. It's already dropped it in at the right size. Usually if I drop any other texture, I have to give it a scale. So here, for instance, I dropped another texture, and I need to tell the map, the object, how to distribute this map, and so triplanar sort of does that for you. And so any object that I create, so say for instance, I was going to draw a box here and apply this material to it, like this. It already has the right scale, and any alterations I make to this box, it will automatically apply the scale. Now you might say, why not use this for everything? The problem is, if I applied a triplanar map to, say, something like these timber posts, this would work in one direction, but as soon as I also have timber beams, it wouldn't. So in this case, what would happen is the grain would always run, say, in the vertical direction, and so as soon as I have beams, this wouldn't work. And because this triplanar map is selected, I can't adjust it in here anymore, so I can't do any texture mapping. So it's only good for those sort of things. So let's come to the next material, which is the timber on the right hand side. The the other problem that I often see is that textures repeat, and they either repeat over a large surface, say like this floor, or they repeat across things like these timber beams here. So if I turn this on in the background, so maybe to briefly illustrate this point with the triplanar, I have got a so this L material, I've imported it twice, once with the triplanar mapping settings, and I'll just apply this to this here. And you can see, if I turn this to my diffuse, you can see it a bit, you can see the grain clearer. So it runs all right up here, although not in that direction, but it doesn't there. So it needs texture mapping basically. So I will change this now to the normal map. So this was the elm material. This one here, and so when I imported, I unticked this like that and pressed import, and here we are. Right, so let's start by texturing up one of these beams here. Ignore this for a minute. So you go into here, your properties, and here on the texture mapping tab, you can select your box mapping in this case because it's quite a simple object. In this case, actually, I could just press confirm because the bounding box will just snap to this rectangular object. So if I did this now and I just say OK to all of that, because I can change the orientation afterwards, I've now just applied a simple box map to this material. And it's hard for me to tell now if this is actually correct because the scale is off and it's just adjusted as to the kind of overall size of it. So I know this map is 200 centimeters. So I just equalize all of these and I can lock the size for all three. Now it doesn't run the right way in either those directions. So one way to do this is to show the mapping like so. I can now see the box, and so if I now select this one to be like this and this one to be, actually it's already right, yeah, it's right. So now both are running the right direction, and at the top it's running this way, which is also good. You can also move this around now and so on. Now I hide this again. I want all the others to be like that one, right, and not go around and do them all individually. So you can select them all like this, and then up here you can match the mapping to this one and say OK. And now all of these pieces are mapped in exactly the same way. And then you have to go in and do the same for this one. I will just explain how this box mapping would work. If I didn't do just confirm the bounding box, you can basically draw what this box would look like, and you say OK to capped, and now it's applied it to here. My scale is off, of course. Tell this to be 200 again. This is wrong, so I will rotate it like this and rotate this one like that, and we're done. And again, like those, I could actually have done this by selecting all of them together and then done the same also, and it would have done it to all of them all at once. I don't have to do this matching it necessarily. Yeah. Right. Now I've mapped these up. Now my grain runs the correct way. And again, anything I draw new like this and I apply the material, I have to go through this whole thing again. 3ds Max has an option where you just draw in real world scale, so all you have to change is the direction of the map. I can't find this in Rhino and it probably doesn't have it, so you always have to just say, that was the wrong way around, have, do it like this to adjust the mapping. Now that we've mapped both the vertical and horizontal timbers, um, we can see that through their repetition we get these streaks, which we want to avoid. And V-Ray has a map, and this is wired in by default to all the texture maps. So here in my timber material, my normal diffuse and reflectance maps, all of them, if I extract them here, have this UVW placement map um, instanced in. So if I change it here, it will change it for all of these. And this UV placement map tells it to basically, it has an option down here where you can start to randomize your maps. And so to explain this for, in this case, what I really want to happen, of course I could apply a different timber material to all of these and then I would have this, I would have variety. However, I can just use this one map which looks like this, just to remind you. Looks like this. It's actually made of little pieces all stitched together to make this texture. So now all I really want to do is to move it around on each one of them to create to create more variety along the face here. And you can do this by in your VW placement map by changing these settings down here. Now, before you randomize these textures, you need to tell V-Ray here how you are going to do this or by what method. So in this case, we want to utilize the fact that V-Ray, that Rhino will give each each object that you're creating, it will give it a unique render ID. So here they are. So each one is given a different one. So if now I select my randomization by render ID, and if I now told it to here, there's an offset from 0 to 1, and I tell it to do that in a number of steps. It doesn't really matter too much in this case, so it moves it by a tenth in either direction randomly from each one, and it also the UV rotation here is set to vary from 0 to 360 in steps of 2, meaning that it will rotate it by 180 degrees like this, and then 180 degrees the other way around at random. And so if I select these, it will now start to randomize the map. So if I just save this, so if I turn it off, they are all the same. You can see the knot here repeating. Okay, another way to introduce a variation into these individual pieces here is to introduce a color variation between each of them. So you can use a multi-submaterial for this. And this map has many other uses too, but I'll just show you what it can do in this case. So if you set the get ID from random, and you then tell it again to use the render ID, you can introduce a slight variation. So I'll do this extreme so you can see what it does. But it will now vary the hue from timber to timber. So if I did this on a very low setting, it will just introduce a small variance between each already, probably too strong. But you know, this way also you can create more variety between each, and this might also work for a tiling, or if you have panels on the wall and you wanted their reflectivity to slightly vary across the image, you can do the same to, I did this now to the diffuse, but you could do the same to reflection to kind of um, vary the individual pieces. Okay, the next thing I wanted to show you was this material here, and I just wanted to explain how you can change these materials to your liking. So I applied this concrete simple material again from V-Ray Cosmos in here, and again because it has direction, I on import I left this unticked and then imported it. So here it is. It had actually, let's start from scratch. So I will put it again. You can change materials if you click to use as replacement, and then you click the one that you want to have replaced, and you click replaced all references. We now have shifted everything to this material here. So I can delete this one now. Right, so here it is as it came in. Ticket. So I click on the first, and actually already wrapped into this material is a color correction, and here input is the actual map of it, and you can see that the original map is brighter. So if I go up a level, this one is darker because down here it put the brightness down by about 23%. So if I put this back to 0, it's now as per the original um, image. But this is how you can wrap other textures on top of your previous texture. Now, what's sort of not quite truthful with this material here, and you can see this by, if I show you the geometry, by this element here, sort of cantilevering out, is that I can't really read it there in my render. And part of the reason, I mean, this could be sort of textured up a little bit better for sure, and more accurately, which I can also show you in a minute. But one of the reasons is that it applied. I don't quite believe it. Haha. No, I did this wrong earlier when I did replace. Um, so here it is. So you can't really see this very well, and I'm sort of missing this dirt that I would usually get around these edges if I think of these kind of rough concrete buildings. So one way to do this is to go in Photoshop, or use the you can set a sort of ambient occlusion pass and use this overlay in Photoshop to get the edges a little bit darker, but you can also do this in the material itself. So here in the diffuse, I will wrap in the dirt map. So I go to wrap in, and there's plenty of other options here as well, and you can start to mix maps and so on. Down here I have dirt, and so I select this, and basically what it creates, and I will, yeah, what it creates is a dark overlay on the edges. And at the moment it creates this um, on the edges that are facing inwards, but if I want it on the outward facing edges, I click ambient and inner occlusion, and it will now do it on both. To see this a bit clearer, I will turn this my texture off, and now it will just show this white, so you can see it a little bit better. And I will just turn the occluded color to red just to make that a bit more visible. So now, and let's just focus on this area. So now you can see that the map has selected all of these, but it doesn't really give me a sort of gradient here, and it's more like a line, and this is because it's basically only a centimeter big. So if I made it 50 centimeters, you can see now it's occupying more of the cube. Now, what would usually happen is that it's stronger towards the corner, and then it falls off sort of quicker, not quite so linearly. And this is the fall off value here that you can change. So if I set this to 1, for instance, it will push the dirt more into the corners and be more expressed there. So this looks better. So now that you, well, actually, let's leave it red for a second. The next thing I would do is that the dirt wouldn't really be quite so linear on a material this rough. It would have sort of streaks. So you can turn these streaks on here, and they're not particularly strongly visible here, and this is why they're missing a bias, a direction of pull. And because gravity would pull the dirt downwards, you have to increase the bias down here on the z-axis. So if I put this to, say, 15, now it increases the dirt along these, and it's probably now overdone, but it's very much more visible. So if I now turn this back on, and if I get rid of the red and put this back to a dark tone like this, it starts to look more like weathered. So if I find it too strong, I can just make it a little bit brighter, or I can decrease the radius amount, and now it starts to look more like weathered. And I can apply this to all other objects back here as well, and it will automatically do it to all of them as well and give them this this weathered appearance. The other thing I want to point out, again done by default from Cosmos, but it also has stochastic tiling ticked. And it again has the UV rotation in steps of 2, so it will flip by 180 degrees. And the other thing that it has set here is it will offset in the y direction. And if I show you the map, this one, in the y direction, so u v, so u is your x and y is your v. So in the v direction, sorry, it offsets it by 15. Now I'm pretty sure that these will be 15 kind of shutterings horizontally, and basically it will vary these now in 1/15th, and so you probably wouldn't see it in a wall this size. Right, so already here in the viewport I can see a repetition from here to there, which is my 2 meters map ending, but basically in the render itself that's not the case. So your render will look different to the viewport because it applies these randomization settings that are already part of this map into here. This is worth remembering if you are doing a brick wall, for instance, and you don't want the brick to repeat. So you could count your brick courses, and you can set this value here according to how many courses you have, and it will help. It will not completely get rid of it, but it will help making your materials look repetitive. So lastly, come back to UVW wrapping. Say I had this one, and I can't do bounding box on this one because it's not orthogonal to my world map, so the bounding box would not apply this very well. So I will draw it in 3 points. So we'll do this. Now, if I'm not happy with, say, here I wanted it to run vertically and not horizontally like everywhere else, I can select the UVW editor. And this is new in V-Ray 8 and looks like this and is actually much better. And I can select these faces here and I can drag these out over there separately, or I accidentally selected oh, this one. So I'll drag these out like this. So what I can do with this is basically here in the background, this is where my map sits, 2 meters map. And if I wanted to change direction, I can now rotate these around and it will rotate my map here. I can also change the scale. So now by making this bigger, I will make my texture smaller. If I do this, the texture will become bigger and stretched. But this way you can alter this. If you don't like how this piece here sits, the only problem is you have to find it in here, which is not great. In 3ds Max, I can click on this face and then select it in there. But for instance, if if you didn't like the orientation of this, you can just go in there and rotate it around to be like that. And so you can go into fine detail if that should be necessary. Again, if it's visible, it's important. If not, don't worry. Good. I think this concludes the tutorial on texturing and materials. Thank you.